Welcome, everybody, to this Whole Life Action Hour. I'm Ocean Robbins, your host, and today we are here to talk about the latest discoveries and medical advances in understanding the impact of your microbiome on your body and your brain. We're going to look at the powerful lifestyle and especially dietary strategies that can nourish those trillions of critters upon whom your life, your digestion, and your mood depend. So in this conversation today, we're going to explore the transformative power of food to manage conditions from celiac disease to food intolerances. We're going to look at IBS and acid reflux and more, and look at how you can create the conditions for reduced inflammation, improved mood stability, and enhanced overall health. Now, before I introduce our guest today, I want to just say this is a project of Whole Life Club, which is Food Revolution Network's ongoing membership community. Some of the questions I'll be bringing to this interview come from a Whole Life Club members. Nothing you hear today is medical advice. We're offering coaching and our own best insights, but of course, always consult with a qualified healthcare professional about your specific healthcare realities and needs. And now I get to introduce our guest today. Dr. Alan Desmond is a trailblazer in gut health with over a decade of clinical expertise. He is passionately championing the transformative power of a whole foods plant-based lifestyle. He's accredited in both gastroenterology and general internal medicine, and he's a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians, London. Dr. Desmond has garnered international acclaim for his evidence-based dietary recommendations. He's currently thriving as a full-time clinician, and after specialist training in Ireland and Oxford, he has seen remarkable outcomes in his practice, which is further fueling his advocacy. Dr. Desmond, welcome. It is so great to be with you today.
Ocean, thank you so much for inviting me to spend this time with your whole life community. I'm really excited to get into it.
All right. Well, let's jump in then in that light, and let's talk a little bit about the microbiome. So, Dr. Desmond, what is the microbiome? And can you tell us why is it so important?
It's so important. And it just as a preamble to this, let me just note, Ocean, that the reason the gut microbiome is so important is because gut health is so important, okay? We have this old saying that all health begins in the gut. If all health begins in the gut, we are in trouble right now, my friend. The US in particular. We've got so-called irritable bowel syndrome affecting up to 45 million Americans. 1 in 5 US adults has gastroesophageal reflux disease. 1 in 3 US adults under the age of 50 have diverticular disease, which costs the US healthcare system $2.5 billion a year. Colorectal cancer affecting more than 1 in 20 adults in their lifetime. A plant-based gut is a healthy gut, and a healthy gut is fueled by plants. And a big part of that is the human gut microbiome. As you and I are talking right now, we are not alone, Ocean. We are accompanied by between 50 and 100 trillion microbes, bacteria, viruses, yeasts, and archaea that reside within our digestive tract, mostly within our large bowel. As many cells as our human body, 100 times more genetic material than our human body. These bacteria, viruses, yeasts, and archaea begin to populate our human body at that very first moment of birth, that first human touch, that first sip of breast milk. They help us to digest our first meal. As babies, those bugs are crucial to the development of a healthy GI tract, a healthy immune system, and a healthy body. And as adults, they remain really important. In fact, they've been described as a control center for human biology. Our human body doesn't just tolerate our gut microbiome, it interacts with it on a daily basis at a level of complexity that we are only beginning to understand. They're an integral part of the human system. And sadly, as we'll discuss today, I'm sure, in the 21st century, the human gut microbiome has come up against a very potent adversary, the standard American diet, the global standard diet, this meat-heavy, dairy-heavy, junk food-heavy, plant-deficient dietary pattern is probably the toughest adversary the gut microbiome has ever come up against.
Yes. It's interesting as you're talking about all these critters. Most of us grew up thinking of germs as a bad thing. we'd wash our hands and get rid of the germs and kill the bugs and kill the germs, and antibiotics were like lifesavers, which of course they can be in certain circumstances.
Mm.
But it seems like we're getting a much more nuanced understanding today of so-called germs, and that a lot of these germs are actually good for us when they're in right relation with each other and with us.
Not just good for us, I would say they are an integral part of what it is to be a healthy human. If we want to think of the bugs that inhabit our gut, predominantly in our colon, but also throughout our digestive tract, and really on every surface and cavity on the human body, these bugs have been with us since the very dawn of human evolution. When the first two, if you go back millions of years, those first two little living cells on Earth that would give rise to all of humanity were part of the Earth's microbiome. And we're still carrying part of that microbiome as our human body today. So not only are these bugs good for us, but these bugs are also an integral part of what it means to be a human. Within the gut microbiome, whether our gut microbiome is working at an optimal level for health or a suboptimal level for health, or even at a level that may be harming our health on a daily basis, is very, very dependent on a number of environmental factors. And as one of my old bosses back when I was working at the APC Microbiome Research Center as a postgraduate years ago would tell me, the three top determinants of a healthy gut microbiome are food, food, and food. And by choosing the food that you put on your plate every day, Ocean, you can really ask yourself, or you should ask yourself, when you look at that plate of food, what sort of microbiome am I building today? Because when you look at that food on your plate, it is fuel for your gut microbiome. We've described the gut microbiome earlier as a control center for human biology. You can grab the dials on that control center every single day, and you can choose to dial it towards health. Now, the research is absolutely clear that the plant-based gut microbiome, the microbiome that is fueled by fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes and nuts and seeds and tofu and tempeh and edamame and all those good foods, that diversity of plants is a healthier gut microbiome. And as someone who's been reading gut microbiome research for 20 plus years, it's really interesting to me that in the current medical literature on the gut microbiome, the researchers are seeking out vegans specifically to research the health of their gut microbiome, and even looking to vegans to donate gut microbiomes to others in various experiments, because we know that the plant-based microbiome is healthier. And if you'd like, I can give you 4 examples of why the gut microbiome in a plant-based eater is healthier.
Well, I think everyone's going to be wondering why, so please tell.
Okay, well, these are evidence-based statements. There's nothing controversial about that. So when you look at people who are vegan or vegetarian and compare them to omnivores or meat eaters, we find that their gut microbiome is more efficient at producing short-chain fatty acids, optimized for the production of these postbiotic substances that are generated by our gut microbes when we consume fiber-rich foods. Short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, acetate, propionate, these protect the intestinal barrier, provide energy to the cells that line our bowel, help to regulate our immune system, control our appetite, and even control our blood sugar. The plant-based microbiome produces them better than it does in a meat eater. Our gut microbiome in the plant-based individual is better at suppressing the growth of colon cancer cells. The butyrate, one of those short-chain fatty acids I mentioned, actually helps to identify early precancerous cells in the lining of the bowel. This is one of the reasons why vegans and vegetarians are far less likely to develop bowel cancer. That's reason 2. That's the second characteristic. A third characteristic: far lower levels of secondary bile acids. What are secondary bile acids? Well, when you eat a meat and dairy heavy diet, you're eating a very high fat diet, high in saturated fat, high in cholesterol. Your human body has to produce a lot of bile to help emulsify and digest that fat. That bile makes it to the colon. It becomes food for your gut microbiome. It feeds the bacteria that thrive on bile. We call those bilophilic bacteria. and they transform the secondary bile acids into secondary bile acids, postbiotics produced by gut microbes, and these are pro-inflammatory and pro-carcinogenic and a big risk factor for colon cancer. That's the third reason. The fourth reason, and we can talk about this later if you'd like, the plant-based microbiome lacks the ability to metabolize carnitine from red meat and turn it into trimethylamine, which is important because that helps to lower our TMAO levels, which is an independent risk factor for heart disease. And not only that, in individuals who are diagnosed with colon cancer, individuals who have high TMAO levels, which is made by a gut microbiome when we consume red meat, are significantly less likely to have a good outcome from their bowel cancer. So that's why researchers, just some of the reasons why researchers are seeking out plant-based eaters for healthy gut microbiome donations in the medical research right now.
Fascinating. Well, let's go a little deeper on this TMAO topic.
Okay, great.
Trimethylamine oxide. Tell us, why is it bad? And, what do you do to bring your levels down?
So this is the gut-heart connection. The gut-heart connection. So this story, the TMAO story, started about 7 years ago in Cleveland Clinic, okay? So doctors, as you know, we love biomarkers, okay? If you come into the emergency department with chest pain, we do our EKG, chest x-ray, we take a history, we examine you, but we really love biomarkers. Can we do some blood tests to find out what's going on? And your people will be familiar with biomarkers like troponin, CRP, even your blood sugar level is a biomarker. So back in 2017, researchers at the Cleveland Clinic were analyzing blood samples from people coming into their emergency department who were suspected to have had a heart attack. And they found this new chemical in the individual's blood that independently predicted whether that individual was going to have a cardiac event. And this biomarker, they didn't know what it was initially, but they soon figured out that this independent predictor of a bad outcome in people coming in with cardiac type chest pain was actually a byproduct of the gut microbiome, trimethylamine N oxide. So they identified that they followed these individuals for 7 years, okay? And after 7 years, the people who'd come in with a suspected heart attack who had low TMAO, 90% of them were still alive. 7 years later, among the individuals who'd come into the Cleveland Clinic with a suspected heart problem, who had high TMAO levels, only 50% were still alive because this elevated TMAO level predicted major cardiac event, cardiac bypass, major coronary artery occlusion, or cardiovascular death in individuals. They found out that where this was coming from was when you eat red meat, Ocean, and to a lesser extent eggs, there's these substances in those foods called carnitine. And so carnitine gets digested in your GI tract, but not completely. It's available to your gut microbes, and certain gut microbes start turning that stuff into TMA. The TMA enters your bloodstream. It gets converted by your liver into the stuff called TMAO, and it's pro-atherogenic. It exacerbates inflammatory reactions in the vascular wall, oxidative damage. It makes your platelets stickier. It impairs cholesterol transport. It promotes atherosclerosis. In fact, one researcher has referred to TMAO as the other cholesterol. And where does it come from? It comes from our gut bugs that convert carnitine from red meat and choline from eggs into this harmful substance. So a few years later, recognizing that this substance was coming or being driven by a gut microbiome that's been fed red meat and eggs, researchers at the Cleveland Clinic decided to do a really cool experiment. They recruited some vegans and omnivores, and they gave everybody carnitine supplements, 500 milligrams once daily, which would be about the equivalent of having a steak dinner. And what they found was that everybody, vegan, vegetarian, or omnivore, when you haven't eaten anything, your TMAO levels are low. So everybody's the same. But when they gave everybody these supplements, this TMAO, the equivalent of a steak dinner, within a few hours, those TMAO levels started climbing up. By 8 hours, they had reached the level that the Cleveland Clinic had previously shown was associated with such poor cardiac outcomes. Just 8 hours later, they climbed and climbed and climbed. But guess what, Ocean? They didn't climb in the vegans. The levels remained almost flat because those vegans had stopped feeding the microbes in the gut microbiome that love the red meat, that generate TMAO. Years ago, those bacteria were no longer prevalent in the gut microbiome, and the vegans had lost the ability to even produce this harmful stuff, which is just one of the reasons why vegans have much lower rates of cardiovascular disease and heart attack, as you know. So as a gastroenterologist who firmly believes all health begins in the gut, I think this is a great demonstration of how the food you eat impacts your gut health and your gut microbial health, and how that can affect your whole body health.
It's like a positive or negative feedback loop, isn't it? When we eat healthy food, we nourish the healthy bacteria and bugs and so forth that in turn help us digest and make the right use of the foods that we eat. And so when we are cultivating not an unhealthy microbial balance, then the reverse is true. And then we become less resilient to deal with whatever foods we eat if
You're
they're not optimal.
absolutely right. And, building a healthy gut microbiome is so crucial to maintaining a healthy body. And when you eat a standard Western diet day in, day out, red meat, processed meat, animal fat, processed, white breads, white pastas, sweets, cookies, if that's mostly what you're eating, and sadly, that is most of what a lot of people are eating right now, thanks to standard American or global standard diet. We see that foods like that may be making up 70 or 80% of calories for some people. You are building a gut microbial environment that within your gut promotes barrier dysfunction, inflammation, DNA damage, and genotoxicity. You are building, Ocean, a gut microbial environment that is conducive to further disease states.
How long does it take to reestablish a healthy gut microbiome when it's unbalanced? Because I
Well,
imagine these critters reproduce pretty quickly. So what's the timeline like for getting some change and then for getting like really meaningful change?
this is such an important question, and you're going to like the answer. Days. It takes days. We know from a paper that's published, I think, 8 years ago, and the title of that paper was "The Gut Microbiome Responds Rapidly and Reproducibly to Diet." So if you change from the standard Western diet to a healthy whole food plant-based diet, we begin to see beneficial changes in your gut microbial structure and complex and function within a couple of days. There was a great paper published about 9 years ago where they took healthy volunteers from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They were eating a standard American diet, plenty of corned beef and roast potatoes and hot dogs and standard American food. The drill. And they analyzed their gut microbiome in both structure and function. And they found that within their gut microbiome, they had plenty of the bacteria that generate these harmful postbiotic substances. They also found that they had an unhealthy gut microbiome with low production of the beneficial compounds, the short-chain fatty acids, and pretty high production of the harmful substances like the secondary bile acids. And they also showed that those individuals had a high risk profile for colon cancer. And this was after eating a standard American diet for years. All of these people were kind of in early middle age. They then got those individuals to eat a healthy, high fiber, low fat, plant predominant diet with 70% of calories coming from starchy complex carbs, this stuff your microbes, your healthy microbes love. And in just 14 days, their gut microbiomes went from 0 to hero, we saw a complete change in both structure and function. By the end of 14 days, when they reassessed their gut microbial health, they had a really healthy gut microbiome. And they had a really low risk profile for colorectal cancer. And they were able to measure the physiological beneficial changes in the lining cells of their large bowel in just 2 weeks, very quickly. And I think that's incredibly reassuring for anybody to know, because it really, what that research tells me is that it's never too early or too late to embrace a healthy diet.
Yes, absolutely. So true. There was a study published by researchers in PLOS Medicine a couple of years ago, which concluded that moving from the typical diet to an optimal diet at the age of 60 or later could still add 8 more healthy years of life.
Who
And of
doesn't? I
course, if
mean,
people
eight
started
eight more
sooner, they could add
years.
even more.
8 more years. I mean,
Right. At the age of 60, like
eight.
that's I know people at 50 who are saying, "Oh, the damage is done. I'll just go on with my life." And it's like, no, it's never too late to make radical changes. In
I
fact, I
agree.
often like to think that actually the less healthfully you've eaten so far, the more you have to gain with a change now.
You're right. There's so many benefits right there.
Absolutely. I do want to ask you about irritable bowel syndrome. It afflicts hundreds of millions of people around the world, estimated 40 million Americans. It shows up with many different kinds of symptoms, so it's a little bit hard to assess with certainty, but a lot of people are suffering with these kinds of symptoms. Can you
Mm.
tell us a bit about IBS, what is causing it, and what should somebody who is dealing with it do?
Sure. So IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, as you say, affects about 40, maybe 45 million Americans. And what we're really describing there is symptoms on a daily basis, which are having a negative impact on one's quality of life: bloating, constipation, diarrhea, or constipation and diarrhea rapidly cycling between each other, abdominal pain, abdominal distension. And although, Ocean, in the medical literature, we often see the phrase irritable bowel syndrome, honestly, I don't like making that diagnosis at my clinic. I don't use that term when I'm speaking with my patients. The reason being is because for many people suffering with this so-called IBS, the problem goes way beyond irritable. I have seen dozens, if not hundreds, of patients over the years who have been reassured by their physicians that they simply have IBS. But in fact, those symptoms are absolutely ruining their quality of life. I've had many patients who are housebound and have lost their jobs, relationships, etc., because of so-called IBS. So far more than irritable. And I also feel that that label seems to almost blame the individual. Like, there's something wrong with your gut. We can't figure out what it is. It's not our fault. Goodbye. And it can often close the book on an individual, which I think can be extremely disheartening. I generally use the term functional GI disorder. Explaining that to patients is pretty easy. We can do the basic scans and tests here. We can do x-rays and MRI scans and endoscopies, and everything looks normal. It's like having this beautiful brand new car that you sit in the car, everything looks perfect. It should be running fine, but then you turn the ignition and it doesn't work properly. It's not functioning properly. It's not serving you on a day-to-day basis. Now, it's a very big topic, and anybody with IBS ought to see their physician, because obviously some of the very common GI disorders that we mentioned at the top of this interview should be checked for. But in many ways, Ocean, these symptoms of bloating, constipation, diarrhea, abdominal pain, and distension could be described as rather than a disorder or a disease, they could be described as a predictable response to the standard American diet. This high meat, high dairy, plant deficient, high junk food diet, which is the antithesis of a healthy whole food plant-based diet, which would build a healthy gut, right? So where I start with patients who've been diagnosed or told they have IBS, particularly individuals who are eating a plant-based diet, I will start with the very, very basics. So I'm going to give you like 6 or 7 tips maybe that I would give to someone who eats a plant-based diet but is struggling with abdominal symptoms. Of course, seeing your doc is really important, but number 1, don't be a junk food vegan. Those junk foods with these artificial emulsifiers and artificial flavor enhancers actually weaponize your gut microbiome against you. They're often fiber free. They have the beneficial substances and polyphenols removed. They have unhealthy stuff added. More processed foods equals higher risk of gut dysfunction and even higher risk of conditions like Crohn's disease and inflammatory bowel disease. Rule number 2, build that plant diversity. Your gut microbiome loves a diversity of fiber. Being a fruit-only plant-based eater, I don't like it. Being a potato-only eating plant-based eater, I don't like it. I want you to build that diversity of plants. There are literally, I think, about 250,000 edible plants on Earth. I don't want you to eat 250,000, but I certainly want you to aim to get more than 30 different plants per week. If you are new to plant-based eating, consider making the switch gradually so you see the maximum benefits. Your bowel is a little bit like every muscle in your body. Your gut microbiome may need time to adapt to your new healthy way of eating. If you've been eating a standard American diet with 18 grams of fiber for the last 40 years and you're aiming to get to 40 or 50 grams of fiber per day, which may be the optimal, that's an excellent plan. But maybe start slowly. Give your body and your biome time to adapt to your new healthy way of eating. Maybe start with breakfast for the first 2 weeks, then move on to lunch, then move on to your evening meal. I see a ton of patients, Ocean at clinic, who would really benefit from a healthy whole food plant-based diet. But Ocean, they are a million miles from it. It's not their fault. It's our food culture, right?
Yeah.
So often, though, the first move will be to simply eat 3 pieces of fruit a day. That might be the first recommendation that I will make to someone with a very fiber deficient diet. Tip number 4 is find your own way. If you're eating a healthy whole food plant-based diet, particularly if you're new to it, you don't have to eat like your favorite influencer. Just adopt your old favorite diets. Your old favorite foods. If you've really enjoyed things like, chicken pot pie, maybe find a chickpea pot pie recipe. If you've really enjoyed beef burritos, maybe learn to love a bean burrito. So foods that are familiar to you, where most ingredients are the same, but you've adapted them to make healthier plant-based versions. Number 5, if you are already eating a healthy plant-based diet and you are struggling with so-called IBS or functional GI symptoms, what can be really useful for a few days is just to use a tracking app like MyFitnessPal, and just for a few days track your dietary fiber intake. That can be super useful because often, in my experience, individuals may overestimate their dietary fiber intake. And often individuals think, I'm definitely hitting 30 grams a day. I eat so much fruits and vegetables and salads. But when they actually track it, they're not. They're eating 15 or 20 grams of fiber per day, and they really need to dial in on the unprocessed plants. That exercise can also be really helpful because if someone is suffering with bloating and distension and discomfort, and they track their fiber for a few days and they find out they're hitting 45 or 55 grams, okay, that's a great thing to aim for, but it may be possible to get too much fiber, particularly if for the first 40 years of your life, you were on a fiber deficient diet. So sometimes I will ask my patients to do that. And if they are hitting 45, 50 grams, I say, okay, great, but can we just dial it down to 30 grams a day for a couple of weeks and see if your body handles that better? 2 more things. This isn't food related, it's stress related. The gut-brain axis is real. It responds to stress, and that might be a topic for a whole other conversation. But I often say to my patients with so-called IBS or functional GI symptoms, if we don't sort your stress out, we are not going to sort your digestion out. So gut-specific hypnotherapy, mindfulness, any stress-reducing strategy is helpful. So those would be maybe my 5 or 6 top tips for dealing with irritable bowel syndrome, particularly if you already think that your diet is pretty healthy. Maybe those will help.
And those are not bad tips for the rest of us as well. Um, I'm curious your thought on what are the major threats to our guts when it comes to diet. We've talked a little bit about meat and eggs, and the TMAO issue, and choline
Mm.
as well as and carnitine and how they feed into it. You've talked generally about processed foods, but can you tell us a bit about the impact of added sugars? And also, do you have concerns about things like pesticides or preservatives or additives or alcohol?
The things that I see in the highly processed standard Western diet that cause me most concern when we talk about additives are there's a pretty short list that I have on my absolute red list. Okay. These are things that I check everything for. I mean, I eat very few processed foods. I will have, or ultra processed foods. I will have the occasional like oat bar, that kind of thing, but I buy from companies that I know are doing it right. Okay. And what I do not want to see on there, Ocean, is number one, maltodextrin, this artificial sugar, this artificial carbohydrate that is made in, in big vats and in factories, and then is added to almost every processed food because it's a very cheap and stable additive. This promotes the growth of unhealthy bacteria within our gut microbiome, including adherent invasive E. coli, which is a major risk factor for developing Crohn's disease, for example. I also watch out for emulsifiers, artificial emulsifiers. I am maybe a little bit paranoid about it, but for good reason. And this is advice I would give to any of my patients, particularly individuals with Crohn's disease or inflammatory bowel disease. If you are buying a food and the label says emulsifier, so often it will actually say emulsifier, or it may give you a name like carrageenan, soy lecithin, polysorbate 80, carboxymethylcellulose. We need to avoid these, minimize them, hopefully not consume them at all, because they launch a multi-pronged attack on your gut health, reducing the protective layer of mucus within your bowel and promoting abnormal contact between your gut microbiome and your immune system, leading to excessive gut leakiness, leading to chronic inflammation, and again, a risk factor for inflammatory bowel disease in individuals who are genetically predisposed, but a big risk factor for metabolic syndrome also, and increased risk of diabetes, obesity, heart disease, etc. So those are the ones that are like on my absolute red list. When we come to artificial sweeteners, the research, as best as we can see at the moment, suggests that artificial sweeteners have very little effect on the large bowel gut microbiome, which is the majority of the gut microbiome. But there has been some research of late, even just last year, published out of Cedars-Sinai, suggesting that artificial sweeteners may not be entirely benign for our small bowel gut microbiome, which is a much maybe less important gut microbiome, but nonetheless may have an important role in maintaining our digestive health. It seems that these artificial sweeteners are linked to reduced richness of the gut microbiome within the small bowel. We need more studies to tell us if this really is causing harm. But generally, I tend to avoid artificial sweeteners for that reason. In my opinion, having small amounts of sugar is safer than having large amounts of artificial sweeteners. So if I'm cooking at home and I want to sweeten something up, I'll use a little maple syrup or a little date syrup, and I won't sweat it as long as that is a minor part of my healthy plant-based diet, giving me fewer than 5 to 10% of my calories for that day. And if I'm having maybe like a kombucha, I would choose an authentic low sugar kombucha rather than a really sweet tasting, artificially sweetened kombucha, because I do tend to try and avoid those artificial sweeteners for that reason. Although we really need more studies to tell us if these potential negative effects of the gut microbiome actually lead to negative health outcomes. You mentioned alcohol. Well, no good news here. Alcohol is bad for you, sadly. And if big picture, alcohol consumption is an independent risk factor for developing bowel cancer. Not only red meat and other meats and fiber deficiency, but alcohol. There's only two dietary components, Ocean, that independently increase your risk of developing bowel cancer: meat and alcohol. So people know this. When you drink alcohol, it does not go well with your gut. It does not bode for excellent gut health the following day. And in the long term, it's also a bad idea. You asked about a few other components as well in your question. Can you remind me?
Yeah, I was asking if you had any concerns about pesticides or GMOs. I think you actually covered all the others.
It's
Preservatives, I guess, we didn't touch on.
Yeah, it's difficult to discern within the medical literature as to whether organic versus non-organic is something that we really need to focus on for our gut health. The reason I think for the difficulties in determining that in actual human outcome data is because fruits and vegetables and legumes and nuts and seeds and whole grains are just so good for your gut and so good for your gut microbiome that it's difficult within the research to tease out whether there are any negative effects from the conventionally produced products, if that makes any sense. So that's a difficult question to answer. But when I was working on my first book a few years ago, and I was working with my good friend Bob Andrew on the recipes, we talked about this at length, about whether we should be recommending organic. And, I'm ashamed to say that it needed Bob to say this to me. What about the soil microbiome, Alan? What about the soil microbiome? And of course, our gut microbiome is just part of our global microbiome. And for me, the issue around GMOs and pesticides, etc., really brings us right back to the big picture: the Earth's microbiome, the soil microbiome. And I would certainly say my understanding is that organic products are far less likely to disturb the Earth's gut microbiome in a meaningful way. And that's one good reason, and maybe the only reason we need to be concerned about GMOs and pesticides, etc.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just add that most GMO crops have been engineered to be herbicide resistant, and the most common herbicide used on those crops is glyphosate, which is the main active ingredient in Roundup. And glyphosate has, among other things, been patented as an antibiotic. So there is real reason, I think, to be suspicious about what is the impact of consuming glyphosate, which is now being sprayed directly on the crops that are eaten by humans because they've been engineered to withstand it while it kills the weeds next to them. But now these crops are contaminated with levels of glyphosate that were never before in the food supply, which are getting in all of our bodies. They're in all of our bloods. They're in the umbilical cord blood of fetuses, and they're in polar bears. They're in every life form on Earth now. Glyphosate is, and what is this doing to us? We don't exactly know because we're all part of the mass experiment. But it does seem concerning, which I think is another reason why moving away from GMOs could be beneficial, and especially towards organics, because organics are specifically glyphosate free. I'd love to get now to a few questions from our Whole Life Club members. Delorraine asked, would it be more effective to address chronic diseases like diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease by treating their symptoms or by addressing the root cause through gut healing, considering that many diseases originate in the gut? I can guess how you're going to answer this, but
I'm going to answer this by saying, Delorraine, I love you. Yes, gastroenterologists should be in charge. That's the answer to that question. It's such a wonderful question. I'm a firm believer, and we've just barely scraped the surface of the importance of a healthy gut microbiome and a healthy gut through this conversation. But absolutely, managing any of the conditions you just mentioned, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, etc., becomes a lot easier if you are building a healthier gut microbiome every day. And this is because our body doesn't, you asked earlier, Ocean, these germs, we used to think germs were harmful. just remember our body doesn't just tolerate our microbiome, it interacts with it every moment of every day at levels of complexity we are only beginning to understand. A gut microbiome is a crucial part of our incredibly complex human system. And yes, for any of the conditions and more, we need to be using the best available medical treatments, but we also need to be talking to our patients about food for so many reasons. But for me, the number one reason would be because by helping them to build a healthy gut microbiome, we're helping them to build a gut microbial environment that is not conducive to chronic disease. And that's got to be a good thing.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And it's not like there's one, protocol for a healthy gut microbiome and a totally different one for, preventing cardiovascular disease, for example, or type 2 diabetes. The same lifestyle approaches are beneficial across the board. And we could also look at, there's different doors into the same home, essentially. A healthy home starts with healthy food and healthy lifestyle. But I think that the microbiome is a fascinating door into that, maybe the most direct door in to uplifting health of the entire human. Karen asked, is there a natural treatment for an H. pylori infection? Any thoughts? If you're working with a patient who has an H. pylori infection, what do you generally tell them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So H. pylori, for anybody who doesn't know, is a bacteria that lives in the lower part of your stomach near the pylorus, which is this little valve that I spend a lot of time looking at. In fact, that's one of the wonderful things about being a gastroenterologist, Ocean, is we use endoscopy cameras all the time to actually go in and look at the living organ within the living human being that we are treating and trying to make better. I do probably hundreds, maybe thousands of endoscopies every year, and I never get tired at looking directly at the living organ that I'm trying to diagnose and treat. It's just a wonderful privilege. When I look at the stomach of someone who has H. pylori, I see redness, I see inflammation, I may see ulcers, which can cause life-threatening bleeds, and I also recognize that having H. pylori is a risk factor for developing gastric cancer in the long term. So in most cases, if we find that someone has H. pylori, we like to try and get rid of it. Now, unfortunately, the only very effective treatment we have for getting rid of H. pylori is using a kind of complicated course of antibiotics, which we give for 2 weeks. Now, that approach is really successful, and studies suggest that we can eradicate the H. pylori in 80 to 90+% of cases using pretty innocuous antibiotics. But I very often get asked, is there any other way to do it, doc? Do I have to take the antibiotics? There's been a few studies looking at broccoli sprouts on this. Why broccoli sprouts? Because they are a really rich source of sulforaphane, which is a really, really beneficial substance that we find in cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower, but is particularly rich in those sprouting broccoli seeds. And there was one US study done a couple of years ago, and I guess these researchers had heard stories about people curing their H. pylori with broccoli sprouts. And they I think they had like 100 people on the study, and they asked these individuals with H. pylori to consume 16 grams of broccoli sprout powder every single day for 28 days. That's about the equivalent of 1 cup of undried broccoli sprouts. And they found that after 28 days, 56% had cleared their H. pylori. Now, that's not as effective as the antibiotics, but 56% eradication rate, I think, is pretty good for broccoli sprouts. I'm sure you'll agree. So if I have patients who aren't keen on trying the antibiotics, right, I would say, well, let's try this first, and then let's check again, and, maybe we'll talk about the antibiotics then.
Yes, fascinating. Thank you for that. We have a question from Corey asking about coffee enemas, saying there are several alternative medicine practitioners who recommend them to help the body rid itself of toxins. Do you have a perspective on this?
I guess it's interesting, and I'm aware that maybe coffee enemas this alternative practice may have sprouted from very well respected and ancient medical practices They may be culturally important to certain individuals. But in the 21st century, what I want to look at is the outcome data. And unfortunately, there haven't been any studies showing that coffee enemas help the body to rid itself of toxins. There haven't been, there's been several meta-analyses of the studies that have been done on coffee enemas, and we cannot say that it does anything beneficial to the human body. There have been numerous reports of individuals developing irritation in their colon due to coffee enemas. We call that a chemical colitis. You don't want that. You get, bloody diarrhea. I mean, you don't want to give yourself bloody diarrhea. That's what a chemical colitis is. Resolves in most cases without permanent damage, but not recommended. Ocean, I would suggest keeping your coffee in a cup.
All right, thank you. What about stevia? Beverly asked about stevia. You mentioned earlier about the research on artificial sweeteners, which it's not exactly, but it's a no-calorie sweetener. Any opinions on the topic?
Yeah, so a non-nutritive sweetener like stevia. I cannot give you a definitive answer on this, but based on the evidence and the science as it stands right now, I would say probably not. Probably not. I think it's probably not harmful for the gut microbiome, but I would counter that by saying a small amount of sugar like maple syrup or date syrup is also well known to be not harmful to your gut health. So if you're just looking for a little bit of sweetness, then I would not beat myself up about having a little bit of maple syrup, little bit of date syrup, little bit of fruit compote or, confected fruit that you've made at home, which is really easy to do, will add sweetness to anything for you. So those are my go-tos rather than getting, like I said earlier, if I'm having a kombucha, which is a fermented food, which we didn't even have time to discuss tonight, but I will go for a kind of traditionally produced, very low sugar kombucha. It doesn't taste too sweet, but I love it. I would choose that over getting a kombucha that has a lot of stevia in it and tastes really sweet.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I recently myself was having a breakfast with some unsweetened granola and unsweetened soy milk, and I wanted to add some sweet to it, and I added some chopped up bananas, some chopped up mango, and some blueberries. And I have to say, it was very delicious, and I knew that I wasn't harming my health in the process. And good to hear your thoughts that, they say a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down, and sometimes adding a bit of sweet to something, an overall healthy dietary pattern can make it more pleasurable and more enjoyable, and that can be lovely too.
Agreed.
Linda asked about antibiotics and recovery from antibiotics if someone has needed to use them. She said she was advised to take a probiotic supplement during and after an antibiotic course a few years ago, but has recently heard that probiotic supplements may not be helpful or could even be problematic. So what's the current knowledge and practice for recovery after antibiotic use?
Well, the first thing to say is that your gut microbiome is a lot tougher than you think, Linda. A lot of people seem to consider that the gut microbiome is like this incredible, fragile creature that we need to really, really coddle on a daily basis. But it's a lot tougher than we think. It's not fragile. In many ways, it's anti-fragile. It's a very resilient organ, maybe the most resilient organ in our body, if we want to take that analogy a little bit further. Now, there are certain antibiotics that don't even affect the gut microbiome, like amoxicillin or nitrofurantoin, for example. But it is true that if we take a course of many of the standard antibiotics, it will have a temporary, measurable impact on our gut diversity and gut microbial richness and gut function. But that doesn't outweigh the benefits of having an antibiotic if you really need it. Goodness knows we don't want someone dying of pneumonia or a dental infection because they're worried about what might happen to their gut microbiome. The good news is that the research tells us that within 3 months of a single course of antibiotics, your gut microbiome is like 90 to 95% recovered from where it was before you ever had the antibiotics. So what can you do? during those 3 months to help to promote and help your gut microbiome to recuperate? Well, we talked about it earlier, and some of these other tips: a varied plant-based diet, more than 30 different plants per week. Getting enough sleep is important, 6 to 8 hours per night. We know that shift workers and sleep-deprived workers and jet lag all disrupt our gut microbiome. In fact, some researchers think that the gut microbes help to set our circadian rhythm. So our gut bugs like a good night's sleep, just like the rest of us do. Time in nature will help to rebuild. We know that our gut microbiome comes from natural environments, gardens, parks, outdoors, hiking, swimming in the sea. This all helps to rebuild a healthy gut microbiome. And so does exercise. My alma mater, University College Cork, where I first studied the gut microbiome in the APC Microbiome Research Centre, we produced some really interesting data there a number of years ago showing that athletes have a healthier gut microbiome. And further research has shown that by exercising, every time you go to the gym, when you bang out an extra couple of reps, Linda, you're actually banging out billions, trillions of reps because your gut microbes are benefiting from that exercise too. And exercise helps to put your gut microbiome in a positive direction, right? So you can count those reps in trillions, Ocean, avoiding alcohol, avoiding unnecessary medications. And based on recent research just published in the last 24 months, I would say maybe 1 serving of fermented foods each day. So you're looking at your kimchi, your kombucha, your kraut, your natto. Just maybe 1 serving per day should be enough. And probiotics, I don't rate them in this setting. I know there are some gastroenterologists and even some other practitioners who will say, okay, this certain strain of a certain probiotic may, in some studies be shown to somehow promote more rapid recovery. But the benefits that you see from certain strains, I mean, compared to the benefits of everything we've just discussed, those benefits are so minor. And you're absolutely correct that some studies have shown that probiotics may slow down the recovery of your gut microbiome after having a course of antibiotics. So I almost never recommend probiotics to my patients.
Got it. Thank you so much for that. Couple more questions I'd love to see if we can get to even briefly, although I know these are big topics. But Linda G asked, with autoimmune disorders, should I always avoid gluten?
Oh, sure. So that's a good question. I'll try to keep it quick because we've got a few more questions to get through. Healthy gluten-containing whole grains are part of a healthy diet. So eating healthy, in fact, if you permit me, I get asked about whole grains and gluten so much that I keep this study right here on my phone. I can dial it up anytime, okay? So whole grain consumption, including gluten containing whole grains, meta-analysis published in 2016, 64 high-quality studies on whole grains and health. The number of participants in each data set ranging from 245,000 to 705,000. Conclusion: whole grain intake, including gluten-containing whole grains, is associated with a reduced risk of heart disease, cardiovascular disease, total cancer, and premature death from all causes, respiratory disease, infectious disease, diabetes, and all non-cardiovascular, non-cancer causes of death. I mean, do we have a superfood here? Whole grains make you healthier and help you to have a longer and happier and healthier life. If you don't have a diagnosis of celiac disease, then there is no good reason to avoid gluten. And although celiac disease itself is an autoimmune disorder, and this may be a topic for another long conversation, it isn't the gluten that triggered that autoimmune condition. It's other factors that have caused that person to react to gluten. So I don't recommend avoiding healthy whole grains, particularly healthy whole grain sources of gluten, and particularly a good sourdough, particularly a good whole grain sourdough in individuals with autoimmune diseases, because the science just doesn't back it up.
Got it. Thank you. So do you think there are people, though, who have gluten sensitivity? I mean, I know there's some folks who have felt that when they went off gluten for a period of time, symptoms did disappear and they didn't have diagnosed celiac disease. Do you see that
No,
sometimes?
it's very true. I mean, there's so gluten has been unfairly demonized, I think, and the gluten-free industry is big business, worth billions of dollars every year. Okay, so gluten-free foods, that is a big business. We think about 1% of the U.S. population have true celiac disease, although 1 in 3 carry the gene for celiac disease. Only a tiny minority actually develop it. Then we've got like a true wheat allergy, which is people who consume wheat-containing foods, and they've developed a hypersensitivity, so that can be life-threatening. And we're talking EpiPen territory here, where individuals have a true allergy, they get difficulty breathing, tongue swelling, itchiness, etc. That's a medical emergency. But we also suspect that about 1 in 100 people, about 1% of the population, will have this condition that we call non-celiac gluten sensitivity. In fact, we've known about this for 45 years. It was first described over here in the UK by a group of gastroenterologists in Birmingham University Hospital. So these are individuals who, when they consume gluten-containing foods, they feel unwell. They may develop bloating or digestive discomfort. When I see patients with this issue, number one, I need to go through their dietary intakes and find out what their sources of gluten are. Because sometimes their sources of gluten are white bread, pizza, croissants, sausage rolls, etc. I'm like, okay, maybe it's not the gluten that's making you feel bad, okay? Maybe it's everything else that is coming with that gluten-containing food. For individuals who are eating healthy gluten-containing whole grains, if they are suffering from constipation or bloating, those healthy whole grains may be producing bloating and discomfort for other reasons beyond the gluten. There's a fermentable component in healthy whole grains that contain gluten, which we refer to as fructans, wheat fructans. They're a FODMAP, and they can cause bloating and abdominal discomfort. If you are a person or you have a patient who doesn't have celiac disease, doesn't have a true wheat allergy, but doesn't feel well when they consume gluten-containing foods, in my experience, what we need to do is, okay, we're going to go gluten-free, we're going to do it for 6 weeks. But during that 6 weeks, you are going to really work on the overall healthfulness of your diet. I want you to include naturally gluten-free whole grains like quinoa, buckwheat, whole grain rice, millet, and gluten-free oats during that 6 weeks. And after 6 weeks of eating really well, including those naturally gluten-free grains and pseudograins, we will then try you on some healthy whole grain gluten containing foods like wheat or barley, but we're going to do it in a really healthy way. We're going to use a nice whole grain sourdough. We're going to have a nice whole grain bread, for example. We're going to have a minimally processed wheat breakfast or something like that. And in my experience, I got to say, Ocean, if we take time to go through that process, it's a revelation for people. They're like, oh my God, I thought I was gluten intolerant, but I just realized it wasn't the gluten, it was everything else.
Yes. Thank you. Fascinating. Okay. Very last question, hopefully a quick one, from Mary P. She asked about blending fruits and vegetables in a high-speed blender. Does blending diminish the quality or benefits of fiber when prepared in this manner as compared to chewing the food directly?
Oh, that's a really good question. Fiber, I mean, obviously fiber is crucial and these healthy foods are crucial. So if you have someone who has difficulty with eating their food, if they have difficulty swallowing, dental issues or anything like that, then this is a great option. Now, despite what we often hear, blended fruits and vegetables do not cause sugar spikes or insulin spikes or cause our blood sugar to skyrocket dramatically faster than if we chew the food thoroughly and swallow it. In fact, several studies have shown that if you blend fruits and vegetables and have them in that manner, that it actually lowers the glycemic index of the food. We're not sure why, but it may actually be an even healthier way to consume whole fruits. My take home on this is that chewing your food thoroughly and running it through a blender isn't really that different. And the science supports that. If you are blending fruits and vegetables and having them in that manner, that is absolutely fine. But what I will say is that a smoothie is only as healthy as the ingredients that go into it. So if you're making that smoothie and you're putting added sugar, sweetened yogurts, or a lot of refined fruit juices in there, then you got to rethink that approach. I mean, if you wouldn't sit down and drink a big old glass of refined apple juice, then throwing that apple juice into a blender with some kale isn't really, solving the problem. So it's all about the ingredients. So, I mean, as I said, a smoothie is only as healthy as the ingredients that go into it.
Well, folks, we've been talking here with Dr. Alan Desmond, author of The Plant-Based Diet Revolution, 28 Days to a Happier Gut and a Healthier You. Highly recommend it. If you want to go further or deeper with his work, again, get The Plant-Based Diet Revolution by Dr. Desmond. And Alan, I just want to thank you so much for your brilliant work and the clarity with which you articulate it, helping a healthier and happier gut become more accessible to all of us. It's been a pleasure sharing this time with you, and I thank you so much for your partnership in the food revolution.
Oh, thank you, Ocean, and thank you everybody who is tuned in to watch this. Such a pleasure to spend time with you this evening.
When it comes to cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, heart disease, and other chronic illness, what really matters isn't how many books you read, how many webinars you attend, or how much you know. What really matters at the end of the day is what you eat and how you live. The science has given us what we need to know. Now it's time for action. It's time to implement and optimize your healthy lifestyle. It's time to get results. It's time to say goodbye to confusion and hello to clarity. It's time to say goodbye to bad habits and hello to good ones. It's time to fall in love with foods that love you back. It's time to join a community that will support you in achieving your goals. It's time for Whole Life Club.